I'm going to attach. We need a name for this thing.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So we explained yesterday. We had a question, and then we had an answer. Let's work with the question. Based on the mashal of the Rav and Talmid, the student and the teacher, we thought we answered the question why Hashem made everything in a way of klal and prat. Correct? Because we said that just like the student and the teacher, because the teacher is so infinitely higher and greater than the student, therefore, if you would just stream to him the way he understands it, he would never actually get down and internalize in the student. So he had to go through this process. We actually said it was a dual process, one inside of him and one where he actually comes outside. It was a Yud K, Vav K. In other words, klal prat, both in his mind and actually in his words, if you recall. And so that finally gets the information into the mind of the student. And we thought we had an answer why Hashem created the world and gave us the Torah in a way of klal and prat. How do we undo that answer? Noam.
Intentionally created by the teacher, but God intentionally created things.
God, very good. God didn't have to make himself infinite to begin with, right? He could have, unlike the teacher, brought out details which were relevant for the student day one. He intentionally brought out the Or Ein Sof, which was infinitely higher than the level of the student, only then to have this problem and need to contract himself and make klal and prat. Okay, so then how do we answer that? Why did Hashem have to do that? Why did Hashem have to reveal the infinite light first and then wind up with this problem of that he needs to go klal and prat?
Oh, because then if you don't start with the infinite, then the doesn't have the infinite in it.
Very good.
Like the drop in the ocean.
Very good. If Hashem didn't start the creation inside of a realm which was beyond creation, then when creation actually came out, it would never be able to make its way back and find the light beyond creation inside of it. It would have been perpetually separated from that. So if Hashem would have just made a world which was only relevant for the world and didn't take us out of a realm of infinity, we would never found our way back, so to speak, to infinity through our avoda of bittul and Torah mitzvahs, etc. Right? Very good. Very much so. Yeah. The end is wedged in the beginning is wedged in the end. But there's another part of this, which we said then answered a kind of an interesting question of how to understand our Mishnah. Couldn't Hashem have created the world in one statement? Why he created in 10, says the Mishnah, because he wanted to punish the wicked and reward the righteous. So how do we explain that? Yeah. Free choice. So this is the other part. If Hashem would have taken us out from this infinite place and just created us as a klal, we would have had the other advantage that we just said a second ago, which is that infinite light would have been sort of seated inside of the creation because we were drawn out from the infinite light. But if he just made the world as a simple klal and didn't then bring out the pratim, we would have never had the tachtonim part. We would never had the idea of feeling separate. So by making the world in such a way of klal and prat, on one hand, he took the klal out of the infinite light. So we have the ability to find that light which is beyond the world. On the other hand, he divided it into pratim, giving us the feeling of separateness, thus creating free choice so that we could actually feel independent and do the avoda of the tachtonim and then have basically a dir b'tachtonim. The two things come together. Everyone follows? That's from yesterday. Questions? Answers? Reports? Good. All right, so let's take it from page Shin Lamed. And we're going to be in Os Vav. It's quite hot in this room, is it not? Yeah. Should we hit the air conditioner? It's right behind there. It's 750 degrees in the shade in Sfat this morning. That's hot. I mean, really, that's the... Thank you. Shekoyach. All right. So, page Shin Lamed Os Vav, second paragraph down into that, and we sort of left off in the middle of that one. We didn't finish it yesterday. And we're going to take it from right in the middle. The line starts Ubamela. You see that? It's right in the middle of that paragraph. Everybody? Parrots, you got yourself a copy over here? Right in the middle of that paragraph, it says Ubamela. Does everyone see that? Ubamela? Okay. It says, if you didn't break up the world into 10 statements, there wouldn't have been shach, the concept of free choice, as we said yesterday. Therefore, Hashem created the world in 10 individual statements. This brought the creations to be in a state of self-independence, as opposed to how they were inside the klal, all in a state of like non-being, right? Just in a potential state. When he created them in 10 individuals, it gave them the feeling of yesh, of self. Once you have an Indian of independence, then you can have the Indian of free choice, and then you can also have the Indian of schar and onesh. Then you can be rewarded or punished for your free choice. And as the Mishnah says in its own language, to punish the wicked and to give good reward to the righteous. Aval, however, but since he now delineated the 10 spheros and the 10 statements of creation into such a state of yesh that it's even possible to choose improperly, free choice is great, but it's dangerous. You can now be so independent that you could forget your connection to your source and just go running off in your own independent world and make bad decisions. Like, unfortunately, many other examples as well, right? In order to fulfill the intention of creation, in other words, that there should actually be a revelation of God in this world. And that these creatures which now have free choice should actually make the right decision, nullify themselves to Elokus, and therefore be a merkava for godliness. That's why the creation started off by first being created with a one statement. In other words, we all were sort of given a leg up in this operation, right? Because it's so dangerous to all of a sudden be turned into a yesh. Hashem had to safeguard that by first creating each and every one of us out of this cloth of oneness, so that we would actually have a fighting chance to find our way back to it, right? That's why he created the world first in this state of a klal. And only from that klal, where we already sort of been imbued with this feeling of oneness and bittul, like naturally from above, then he took us and separated us all out into parts and individual. And therefore, we all have inside of us in a concealed way, just like the many of the world was sitting inside of that klal in a concealed way when we were all inside of one drop and we had no individuation. There was like a theoretical all of us sitting in there, but it was in potential. All that could be seen in a revealed way was the oneness. So too, when we come out, now we all have in a sort of the foreground is all of our individuation, but we all have in potential that oneness as well. It goes both ways. So we still have inside of us this nefesh elokis. There's like a faint hearing that helps us to choose properly, because we remember what it was like to be inside of oneness in some deep level of ourselves. And therefore, through our service, we can reveal that which is latent inside of us. If you're going to have to find it on our own, this goes back to a conversation we've had several times, which is when Hashem created the world, he wanted to create it first with the midah of din. He saw that it wouldn't last, so he partnered with it, the midah of rachamim. It's the same idea. What does it mean he wanted to create the world with the midah of din? If Hashem would have had his druthers, he would have theoretically created the world directly from the level of the pratim. In other words, just make from like his infinite essence, just make like separation and independent self. That's like as tachton can get. And he would have loved it if from that state we would have then made a dira for him. The problem is he saw that it wouldn't last. We never would have found our way back if we weren't first like kashered in the klal of oneness. And then from there we had to be taken. In other words, he partnered with it, the midah of rachamim, so that by the time we are individual, we're not really that far from the oneness because we came from there. Shenishava mehem, right? That in here. So hold on. So by our service, we'll reveal the original klal of the Maimer Echad. Shebechol adargos. Oh, ad la ratsh shlatei atzimtzum. Which klal? In other words, are you going to say that inside of us is that primordial soup of the Chomer Harishon, the original materialism of the world from which we're all sort of formed? Yes, we all have that like original klal inside of us. But what about the klal that comes before that? What's the klal before the Chomer Harishon? Remember we said there's so many klals. There's the Maimer Echad, which was Bereshis of Malchus of Atzilus, and then there was one of Chochma of Atzilus, and then Keser, and then Adam Kadmon, and then before the Tzimtzum. Remember all that? We talk. So which klal Maimer Echad do we have inside of us? All the way back to the beginning. Hashem basically created the world all the way from there, that the entire world would be included inside of the klal that was inside of the Orient Sof, like the drop of water as it was still in the ocean. So to that level of bittul was imbued inside of creation, and therefore through digging away and chipping away with the Torah mitzvahs and working on our egos, etc., we can actually reveal the original klal, which is a light, which was actually before the tzimtzum, which is inside of us, because that's where we came from. That's what he says in the parentheses, Shebechol adargos, that Maimer Echad at every level, even to the point of the will that was before the tzimtzum. And where can you reveal that? In the Asara Maimonish Uba Olam. You can reveal that in your little private place, in your 10 statements of creation, and in the world around you. Shenishava behem, that was created with these 10 statements. Sheyagilu Elukus Ba'olam, so that there will be revelation of God in the world, V'shiyeh batul lelukus, and that the world can actually nullify itself back to Elukus, can find that place inside of you. And that's basically, just what I'm going to send us to a little side note for a second. And there's a mimer in Derech Mitzvosecha, Hamanas Elukus, a very deep mimer, and in the end of that, it speaks about the idea of the ability for certain tzaddikim to see the future. Right, that basically there's certain levels of tzaddikim that can see you're like up to like 10 years, or like in the tens, like up to 100 years in the past. And certain ones they can go into the hundreds, they can go back to like 1,000 years, right? And certain ones you can see all the way back, and you can see like 1,000 years at a stretch. What's going on there is that basically as the worlds come lower and lower, right? Let's say in Atzilus, you have the original 6 spheros. And it says that each sphere is like 1,000 years of time. So when Hashem created the 6,000 years, He first created all 6,000 years at the same time. Chesed was 1,000 years, Gevurah was 1,000 years, etc. Inside of Atzilus, basically have all of the existence of all creation. When He then went to Bria, He went out of the thousands He broke them into the hundreds. So instead of in like one day, you having an entire stretch of 1,000 years, you have the 1,000 years broken down into groupings of hundreds. So for example, should I be able to experience Atzilus, I can experience 1,000 years in one day. Should I be like sort of drawn down into the realm of Bria, I'm opened up to being able to in one moment to experience 100 of years at a time. And when you go down to Asiya, tens of years at a time. And in this world, it's as it is, right? We experience time in its normal units. So the idea is that where is Atzilus? Where is Bria? Where are they? You ever thought about that? Where's Bria? Everything's in the same place, right? It's here. It's different dimensions. So we talk about like the Baal Shem Tov, we can go back and see, or it says by the Arizal, people used to walk by the Arizal with their hands over their heads, because they didn't want them to look at their forehead, because he could see all their lives by looking at their foreheads. There's a story like of the Rebbe like that. People used to cover their foreheads in front of the Rebbe also.
That's why
That's right. So the idea is that what's the mystery? They basically went into a bittul, into the creation, back into the klal, right? They found inside of themselves a previous state of existence before it became so separated and so distinct. They found a previous source of the creation, which is right there in them. All you need is to bittul yourself. I don't know, it's so simple to do. but to basically like find the previous cloud, so that you're sitting here and you're sitting in a situation where you can see 1,000 years at a time. It says Moshe came to the edge of the land and he saw everything that was ever going to be in the whole land of Israel, from the beginning of its conquest to the end. It's written in the Torah, right? Right, Miyama Acharon, it says from the Yoma Acharon, it says he saw from the beginning to the final sea, and the Rashi says to the final day. How do you see everything? Right? Because Moshe was in Atzilus. So basically, it's like for you, it's just like having a look at the weather forecast. Okay. Anyway, this is the idea of essentially finding the Gilui Elokus and the Bittul to Elokus by going back and identifying inside of yourself the original klal. Obviously, we can do it on whatever level we do it on. Okay.
Theoretically speaking, to get to the original klal.
Say it again.
Theoretically speaking, you can reveal the original klal, which is.
I'm saying, yeah.
The original klal does,
The original klal we said. The original klal we said was who knows what the original klal was? We spoke about it a bunch of times. Because it's the original klal of the world. So when did Hashem first think of the world? There's the levels of Hashem that are beyond the world. And for that, it's not called a klal. Right? So when was the original klal, as far as we know right now? We're calling it, the Rebbe calls it the Aliyas Haratzon before the Tzimtzum. When before he made the Tzimtzum, it arose in his will that there was going to be worlds, and he's going to make a tzimtzum and all this. This was the original like source of the world. And then we said the original prat was in that klal. He shi'er ba'atzmo. He like sort of self-measured everything that would ever be. So you have the klal and the prat right there inside the Orient Sof, like we said, like a drop of water when it's still in the ocean and has no individual expression yet, but it's there in some theoretical way. That's what we're calling it. So far as what he said is the original klal of the world. All right, let's go into Os Zion. Al pi ze yuvan gam ze. According to all this, we can understand also shebetechila heira or shebechinas giloy etzem shelamayl mishaychas laolamos. That going back to this topic, that now we can fully understand why Hashem originally let out a light, which was called the revelation of the essence, which was beyond any limitations and beyond the worlds. Right, the Orient Sof came first. Umimena dafka, and only from it nimshacha or shlifi erech olamos. And as we said, only from there did he decide to pull out a drop and make a light which is relevant to worlds. Why? He's going further with this explanation. He says, "Hine yedua shabitul ba'olam shmitzad gilay haor shlifnei erech haolam shlifi erech haolamos hu rak bitul hayesh." Okay, we can understand. In other words, could the worlds have reached any level of bittul if Hashem made them without pulling them from the Orient Sof? That's a question I'm going to pose to you right now. I'll say it again. If Hashem made the world like sort of the way I said a moment ago, like originally designed, he made it with the midah of din, which means like he didn't create the Orient Sof and then pull out a drop to make us with, but he just made the world as it is, right? And we were saying, he was worried it wouldn't last. He was worried we wouldn't like find our way back to him. We would use our free choice inappropriately. But what if we used our free choice appropriately? And we did find God. Could the world achieve a certain level of bittul?
Wouldn't stop existing? Because if all you have is yesh, and you bittul your yesh, doesn't it just sort of stop existing?
We're not talking about bittling the yesh to a point of removing the tachtonim, right? He's preserving the tachtonim. The idea is that the tachtonim, in its state of yesh, will conform to some degree. If it goes out of itself, and that's the idea of like Nadav and Avihu. It's undesirable to go to that state of bittul where you actually leave the world shamim, uninhabited. But let's just say, even if you leave yourself and your body to a certain degree, yeah. Very good, right? What we're saying is, and maybe you read it inside, I hope, but this is the idea. Exactly what you just said, that the world would be able to achieve a certain level of bittul. Let's say Hashem created the world, which we weren't hewn out of an infinite source. He just made us 10 statements, and he gave us a Torah. And he's like, do what I say, and we listen. Let's say we did what he said and we listened. We would have what's called bittul hayesh. We would be able to conform ourselves to whatever construct that Hashem wants our bodies to take, right? In other words, when I say a construct, it's like I always imagine the Jewish people in the Midbar. We walked in formation, right? This one on the right, this one on the left, the ark in the center, right? And the whole idea of like the avoda of the Beis Hamikdash, it's just like every kli goes where it goes, and there's the curtains, and there's the walls, and everybody's the Kohen, everything's like sort of just like it's holding their pattern so that it can become a divine receptacle, right? So theoretically, we could have done that. We could have obeyed and taken on some form that would have been a receptacle for Hashem. But as you said, it would only have been called Bittul HaYesh. What does it mean, Bittul HaYesh? We never would have not felt separate. We would have just felt like we were obeying the rules of the master and conforming our actions and our behaviors to what he wants. But we would have still always intrinsically never been able to get out of our independence, because if he would have created us, in such a way that the first existence of us was from a state of independence, we didn't have a prior existence inside of oneness, then we would have never been able to get out of the feeling of independence, right? This, mind you, is the difference even nowadays between Jews and non-Jews. Essentially, we say that the Jewish people, I don't want to digress too much, but it's kind of a hot topic now I said that, right? Is the idea is that there's a couple of psukim which explain the difference between the source of basically Jews and everything else in the world. And it says, Beruach piv kol tzva'am, right? It says, with the breath of his mouth, he created all of his legions. And there's another pasuk that says, Yisrael alu b'machshava. The Jewish people went up in thought. So we see that the creation in general is called coming out of Hashem's mouth. Beruach piv kol tzva'am. All the legions came out of the breath of his mouth. Whereas the Jewish people, it says, alu b'machshava. We went up in his thought. What's the difference between being inside of thought versus being created with the breath of the mouth? The breath of the mouth is something which its origin is outside of your body, right? So in other words, let's say Hashem, we're relating him as a man. There's an inside and there's an outside of this man, right? Which is basically thought and speech. When you speak, the speech itself is already, as soon as it gets off the ground, it's already not inside of you anymore. And therefore, like, its whole identity is being a creation versus the creator, a separateness where your identity is something other than. So even if you're an angel, right? Even if you're like a beautiful creation, if your origin of your very self is from speech, which means you're outside of the creator, that's your experience. And you can't really do anything about it. That's why the Torah wasn't given to them. The Jewish people are called, we went up in Hashem's thought, which means even when we come out and he'll eventually speak us, there's some origin inside of us which knows what it means to be inside of Hashem. Our very origin of our existence is not in a state of separateness, it's in a state of unity. And for the same reason that we were saying here. Therefore, no matter how far you're going to put a Jew into some crazy place, we always say, oh, he's a Jew. You can't convert him, right? And you go with the Baal Shem Tov, no matter how evil he is, he always has that spark of goodness inside of him. Why? Because his origin was such that he's like united with the inside of Hashem. There's a part of him which doesn't feel the separation. Now, he also came through the mouth, because the soul of man was also put into a body. So he has this war that he's fighting against. But there's an aspect of him which feels and remembers, if you could sort of get it to come out, this intrinsic, implicit oneness with God, which didn't go into a state of separateness. Okay, I digressed. But this is the idea that should the creation have been made purely from the standpoint of the 10 statements and not out of the klal, then there would have been a bittul, but only a bittul ayesh. Second line. And why? Because when it comes to this light of the 10 statements, they have a certain level of comparison. Erech means comparison. Which means to say what? You can't truly bittul yourself to something which is in itself taking you into account. This is like, I'm sorry, we have to digress a lot, but in order to understand what he's saying here, we need a few words, right? Let's go the other way. What enables you to have a real true bittul b'metzias, like not a bittul ayesh, but a bittul b'metzias, where you like literally go out of yourself and you are no longer experiencing self. You have to confront a level which is so high that you don't exist in it. Let me put it like this. It's a little bit complicated, but let's say we spoke about Malchus of Atzilus versus that which is above Malchus or even above Atzilus itself. There's two types of light. Malchus of Atzilus is an aspect of God with which he intends to make the worlds, right? And so in that state of Malchus, we are already considered the topic of the conversation. So he's going to make the world with a light of Malchus of Atzilus, and then we're going to then try to nullify ourselves and recognize that the stream from Malchus of Atzilus is our enlivening force, and we're going to nullify to ourselves to it, and sort of conform to the realization that we're being enlivened by God. What aspect of God is enlivening us? It's an aspect which is already considering the existence of the world, that they actually matter and are real, right? Because in the realm of Malchus of Atzilus, there's already an aspect of godliness where he holds the worlds to be an existence. It's just that in its source, he hasn't sort of like streamed that light into making the finite existence. But in the Malchus phase, he's already considered the existence, and it just has to delineate it out. So the idea is, if we're going to nullify ourselves to this light, then we have a problem, because we can never really get out of ourselves, because the thing that we're trying to nullify to it itself is recognizing our existence. So it's like we're stuck basically feeling important, because the very thing that's enlivening us considers us important. Whereas if we will nullify ourselves to a light which is before Malchus or even before Atzilus, the idea is that you're coming to nullify yourself to a realm of divinity which doesn't even recognize your own existence, which means that you can actually lose yourself in it, because in that place, like the light of God before you thought of the worlds, where do you find yourself in such a place, right? You don't exist. You've like encountered an area, a dimension. You can go climbing through dimensions. You can go to the 100 years. You can go to the 1,000 years. What if you go to a place where it's godliness before he thought of any years, before he thought of any existence? Where are you there? You found a place where you don't exist. It doesn't recognize you. And so therefore, you can truly become nothing in that place. Whereas if you only go up to a place, let's say, where Hashem thought of you in the midst of a 1,000-year process, you can say, oh, there I am. Even in the source, I'm there. I'm important. I can never really truly go out of my own existence, because the source of my existence is recognizing and preserving my existence to some degree. Let me just stop there. Does anyone understand? You guys are having a side conversation. What's happening? You understand what I'm saying? What's that? Okay. Yeah.
Seems like is it correct to seems like you touched on the distinction between say Eastern philosophy and Judaism. The goal is to nullify.
But Eastern philosophy does not have a concept like this either. Not to the point that it's much beyond creation. They have a concept of the klal, the oneness of all things, right? But the oneness of all things, remember what we're trying to discuss right now. What question are we trying to answer? This will help us. Why did Hashem create that the oneness of all things, the klal, came out of an infinite light which is beyond creation, right? In other words, what we're answering right now is, why didn't Hashem just start with a klal? If we said a moment ago that the whole idea of there being a klal is that even when we go into the pratim, we will sort of have this memory, this muscle memory, that we were all one, enabling us to return to the one and sort of giving us a leg up in our avoda to find our way back, right? So in that case, Hashem could have just started with a klal. Why did he need to start by taking the klal out of the infinite light? And that's the answer. That's the answer that he's trying to answer right now. Because, and this is the Eastern philosophy this is, in fact, there's a whole story about a group of Hasidic Jews that went to the Dalai Lama, and he said to them, why would you want silver when you have gold? This is what he was talking about. There's something that B'chlal, the Eastern philosophy feels that there is a source of oneness where everything is in a state of unity. It's like finding that original klal, and they're looking for that inside of themselves, and they can sit there all day trying to find it, right? Good. We're saying there's a step higher than that. that klal itself, because if you'll just go there, what will you find? You'll find a place where there's oneness, but there's also hidden details in that oneness. Because what is a klal? A klal is an amalgamation of parts. Even though the parts are in a state of nullity, right? But the fact that they're going to come out in a minute means that they were also inside. So even if you take yourself all the way back to your original klal, and you're like feeling the oneness with all other created beings, there still are all other created beings inside of that oneness. You just broke down the barriers between them. But since that klal ultimately recognizes the existence of all the different parts, therefore you can never really get out of yourself through and through. Because even in your source, there's a knowledge and a recognition of you. How am I going to get out of the experience of self when the very energizing force which I'm trying to nullify myself is promoting myself at some nullified level, of course, but nonetheless I'm still there. That's what I was trying to explain before about Malchus. Let's say Malchus is that drop, right? Even if I'm going to nullify myself right back up to the source of creation, it's a problem. I'm still in there because it's thinking of me. It's the source of creation. It's the cloud. So therefore Hashem wanted to fix this problem. He wanted to give us true freedom of ourselves to not be. And this is Jewish specifically. This is where we jump off their map. Is that we claim that the world came out of an infinite God which preceded creation and has nothing to do with creation whatsoever. The whole idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim is that there's a God which is completely not only beyond creation, the source of creation, he's beyond being the source of creation. And from there is where creation came. So when you go back to your original klal, you're going to find that you're actually inside of an ocean, because you take the drop back inside of its ocean, there at that level, God is not thinking about you. You're not the subject of the conversation. I have a will to make worlds. No, in fact, you're like the most biggest afterthought that could possibly be. You're a drop in an ocean that goes on forever. And therefore, when you get there, you don't find yourself there. What do you find? You find no existence, no world, no nothing. So what happens to you in that picture? You're no existence, no world, no nothing. And you can actually become truly a negated being. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu. He doesn't have an existence of his own. He is the presence of infinity in this world. And it's only possible because the way Hashem created the world in such a way that it came out of an infinite place to start. Make sense?
So this is describing the difference between Bittul Yesh and Bittul Ba'asiyas?
Yeah, we didn't even get to Bittul Metzias yet, but yeah, we basically did. Yes. So if he created the world only from a klal, we would have been stuck with bit. It's nice. We would have had Bittul at least. It's better than him creating just 10 statements where we would have no access to Bittul. But if he created it from just a klal, we would have only had access to Bittul Yesh, because our self is still found in that. The pratim are in the klal. Ein beklal el mashu beprat. There's actually such a statement to that effect. There's nothing in the klal except the pratim. Pooh. Okay. So back inside. That the bittul of that would be achievable of the world from the standpoint of the light, which is the fi erech ha'olamos, which is comparable to the world, it's only bittul hayesh. And because we have a certain comparison to this light, we can't really undo ourselves completely, because the source of the light is kind of keeping us in the game. Whereas the true notion of bittul b'metzias, where you actually cease to experience yourself, right? It doesn't mean you go away like Nadav and Avihu. In fact, that's kind of an experience of yesh. They wanted to experience God. There was still like a self, but to actually be like a non-existent entity, Moshe Rabbeinu, a mouthpiece for the Torah, you can only access such a bittul if you have access to a light which is entirely beyond anything to do with the world, even the first klal of the world. And that's why Hashem made the first thing, the Or Ein Sof, even though when he made the Or Ein Sof, remind yourselves, he was only doing it because he wanted to make worlds. Right? We said before, he did not have to pull out the Or Ein Sof card. He was busy with his world making, but he started off with making an Or Ein Sof, which has nothing to do with the world. Why would you do that? For the sake of the worlds. Because now that the worlds are going to come from the Or Ein Sof, they can experience in my world, there'll be an experience of true bittul. If I would have just made the klal, they would never have got there. So it's actually a necessity for the worlds to have come from an infinite place. Since the purpose of the creation is not that just we should make a world of creatures which are bittul, or just a little bit bittul, or just a lot bittul. The purpose is that we should be bittul b'tachlis habittul. We should be totally nullified out of existence entirely. That's called a dira b'tachtonim. That's a dira, Hashem's dwelling. Bittul b'metzias, because only that is the way we can actually make a home for Hashem. Because Hashem himself, the infinite God, he wants to be here. Therefore, there had to be a light which first preceded, which was above all connection with the worlds. And only from there did he bring out the origin of the world. So that we wouldn't only have a sense of oneness of the first klal inside of us, we would have had a sense of oneness of the infiniteness inside of us that we could go back and sort of remember and refine. Because when he took that little drop of water out, remember we said before, let's just do one more little visual. We said, let's say you have a drop of water, which is the klal, and then you break it into 10 pieces, and those are the pratim of creation. And we said, because all those 10 pieces of water were all one at one point, therefore, there's a sense of, even when they come out, they can remember and feel that sense of bittul that they had when they were a singularity, right? So even in the pratim, they're all made out of water in the end of the day, right? So they remember that, well, your water, my water, it's all the same water. So just like that, look at it the other way. That was one drop breaking into 10. The same thing is true of the drop itself coming out of the ocean. The drop itself is basically the klal for all the worlds. But that klal for all the worlds, even when it comes out as a singular drop, which is pretty nice, that's like your Buddha right there. They're psyched to get back to that drop. It remembers inside of itself, if it comes from the machshava, the yid, right? It remembers inside of itself what it was like, so to speak, to be inside of the ocean. It has imprinted in its DNA ocean, which is no creation, no nothing, right? So it's the same model, just levels and levels of bittul. Listen, we're having by the way, a Buddhist, a serious Buddhist is about to join the Yeshiva of Bezrat Hashem. He sits and meditates 4 hours a day. We got work cut out for us. I told him you can do it in the breaks. Once he sees how busy he's gonna forget to meditate. Okay, so fine. Here's to you, Yitzchak, if you're watching. All right, so where are we? Where are we time-wise? We got 10 minutes. No, that's where it gets a little bit out there. No, it's infinite light. We can't really visualize it because the ocean at the end of the day is a finite body of water. That's why I keep saying it's an infinite ocean. True. So we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're not done with this mimer. Yes. Okay, back inside, if we can find ourselves. We lost ourselves. That's a good sign. There you go. Fine. Please go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. It says Ukamosha Yadua. Footnote 28 right there. That's where we left off. Kamosha Yadua. Shminakudas Harashima Yesh Behelem. Right. So this is going to get complicated. A drop. No pun intended. But he says in the point of what we're going to call the Rashima, which means the imprint. We're going to see what that is in a second. There is, in a concealed way, lo rak kol apratim sheyumshechu achar kach ba'akav elegam mipinimius haor shelamayl mishachas laolamos. Fortunately, it's kind of just what we just said, so we should be clear. But let's try and get it into the language of the Rav here. So he says, in the point of the Rashima, what is basically the point of the Rashima here? I've been talking about a drop of water, which is a great visual, but the reality is a drop of water has measure to it, right? Whereas a true mathematical point, which is what we're saying is basically where Hashem, has like this original klal, it doesn't have any, I'm saying even in the Olam Hazeh, a true mathematician, the concept of a point, you can't make one with your pencil because you can measure that. It's a theoretical idea of a singular point which has no expression in any direction, right? That you can't make a real point. It's a theoretical. But that theoretical point is what we mean when we say the drop of water. That Hashem basically took the infinite Or Ein Sof light, okay, and he put it inside of a point. This is essentially what the Tzimtzum was. Where did all that light go? It disappeared, but it actually didn't go anywhere. He made it inside of a point, which is the greatest of all miracles that could possibly be, right? Because this is Yiddishkeit in its essence, that we believe in such a thing. That, in other words, what are we saying? That God is not only infinite, but God is so infinite that he can be finite. And therefore, it's like what the Torah is. What is the Torah? The Torah is a book. It says, Hafochba ba'afochba dekulaba. We just read it in the Mishnah. Keep turning it and keep turning it because everything is inside of it. When you say everything, do you mean everything is inside of it? Like all of God is inside of this book. This book is like a metaphor for the point of the Tzimtzum where Hashem basically took infinity and he put it inside of a finite place, which is a point which doesn't have any real contours. That being said, that's called the Reshima. In other words, it's called, what is a Reshima? It's like, imagine if you turn off the lights in a room right now, you would see like an imprint of light in your eye, right? There's no light there anymore, but there's some kind of a remainder, an imprint of the light that you just saw, which sort of, you can still see to a certain degree. That's called a Reshima. It's like an imprint of the light. And that's the point. You with me so far? So that point, what he's saying is, has inside of it not only the details that are going to come out of it to create the world, because obviously that point is the chokhmah of all creation. It's what we were saying a moment ago called Malchus. It's the source of everything that's going to come after it. It's like the top of the kav where all existence comes from. But the point he's trying to make here is that it also has inside of it all the light that it swallowed up from beforehand in a concealed way. It has the infinite ocean inside of it as well, right? Because the fact that it's a point means anything that's going to come out of it, as we said before in the Mimer, is going to be streaming out of it through finite parameters, which is why this is such a helpful little point for creating the world. This is what we said before about the Rav and the Talmud. The fact that he put everything into a klal, which means that now after he's going to try and speak to us, having been filtered through that point, that klal, it's going to come out in human language or world language. Right? Because it's now, but the idea is what's inside of that point is not just the things that are going to come out of it on the other side of the Tzimtzum in a finite way. It has all the infinite light of the ocean inside of it itself. And therefore, in reality, even when he speaks out the finite things to the student that come from this point, if they're going to really get their hands on that point, if they're ever going to really understand what their rabbi said and like arrive at that point, they're also going to arrive at what's inside of that point, which is the infinite light, which that point grabbed up inside of itself, the ocean, the whole ocean. So this is like Hashem's clever way, basically, of enabling a finite creature to go and grab the whole ocean. Because of this point, he streamed a reality that we're able to perceive, but we can arrive at the source, which is this point. And when we get there, inside the point, we also arrived at the ocean. So we can ultimately, through creation, reach completely beyond creation. And let's just read this line again. You'll see he's saying that inside. In the nakuda of the Reshima, in the point of the Reshima, yesh behelam, it contains in a concealed way, lo rak kol apratim sheyumshechu achar kach, not all the details that will come out after it, the kav, but it also contains all the inner dimension of the light, which is totally not relevant to the world. It's also inside that point. The kamashal, the Rav v'Talmud, and this is like the analogy of the Rav and the Talmud. So in that point of intelligence that the Rav sort of found, which was for your sake, right? That even when he's like removing all the lights and he's sort of emptying his mind to get ready for you, he still has that point that he still has all of his wisdom, right? Just because he surmised the point that was ready for you and sort of had to put his ocean of wisdom in the back burner, he didn't lose his ocean of wisdom. It's not like he lost that. He still contains the ocean of wisdom. He just sort of set it aside so he could find the point for you. In that point, yesh behelim kol pratim sheyesh bi'achar kach latalmid. So what does that point of the Rav contain? Not only all the details which he's going to then teach you in a language that you can understand because he's now contracted it to come into your purview, which all that is the external intellect of the Rav, right? Only that which is, so to speak, relevant for you, relevant for the creation. But inside of that point that the Rav made in his mind, there's also the panemius of the seichel of the Rav. It secretly contains his entire oceanic mind of the Rav. So in theory, when the Rav he's really a Rebbe like that, he can teach you something which on one hand goes all the way down to your finite parameters, and at the same time contains inside of it not only the klal, but the infinite light of the Rav himself. So you can become like the Rav Mamish through this teaching. It is amazing, I believe. We lost a few students in the class, but everything's going well. So you guys following this? For real? Parrots?
Yeah, it's just like everything I'm learning in Shalom. Literally.
Oh, so you know this already. Since the details that are drawn out afterwards, ad la'asara maimaros shemehem nivra olam bepoel, all the way down to, so to speak, the end of the train, which is the actual 10 statements of creation that made the actual world, right? Since ultimately, hem lo inyan bifnei atzmam, they're not really individual things on their own, all this lowly creation, but really, hem pratim shel haklal, the maimer echad. What they really are details of the klal, right? Everything that you see, it looks like this hat has nothing to do with this pen, right? I would wager a bet, but the reality is, if you kind of think back like, metaphysically of what's really going on here, it's not true, right? Every detail is not an independent thing. It's a prat of a klal. Ad l'shoshu harishon, until you get all the way back to the original source, which is that original klal inside the aliyas haratzon before the orient, in the orient sof. And therefore, if it's part of that original klal, it actually is drowning in an ocean which is beyond the worlds at some level, at its origin. L'chein al yedei avoda. Therefore, through avoda. What is avoda? Avoda is basically minimizing yourself, right? Getting out of your own ways, not being such a yesh, right? In so many different levels of what that means. It's an infinite, lifelong process. At first, someone, takes your milk out of the fridge, you're going to have a hissy fit for the rest of the day. But there's levels. You can eventually get over the spilled milk. You're not going to cry over the spilled milk, but you're going to cry over some other deeper emotional spilled milk. There's a way to just mamish get past it all and sort of work on yourself and find a bittul. It's not easy. It's a lifelong process. That's why you can't point to anyone and criticize, because they wouldn't be alive anymore if they weren't still working on this at some level. But through the avoda, megalim ba'asara maimaros, you reveal inside of the separate realm and the world which is created by these asara maimaros. Lo raka klal de maimer echad. Not only do you get to your Buddhist level of the original klal, nirvana. Ella gama or shlemayla mishayches lo. How do you know it's not nirvana? Because you can't really call it pleasure. That's like sort of like a level of like Gan Eden. It's like I found enlightenment. Guess what you find when you reach this? You can't find yourself, right? You don't find enlightenment. Like enlightenment finds you, and you don't find yourself anymore. It's not like something that you can say I've obtained, because it's a total negation of self. I'm sure they have some version of language like that, but on the metaphysical level, this is in a league of its own. So he says, "Lo rak haklal d'maimer echad." You don't only reach to the first klal, ella gama or shlemayla mishachas, also the light which is completely beyond the world. Ubedugmas hamashal d'Rav v'Talmid, and this is exactly like our analogy. By the student looking into the details, reading the Rebbe's Maimarim over again and over again, 60 times, 100 times, mamish, like living in it. Oh, I learned this one already. Guess what? You learn it again and again and again. Hine sof naisakai adaite de Rabbi. Like it says in the Gemara, that eventually, after 40 years, you will reach the das of your Rebbe. Right? It says, ad arbaim shanin, Lo kai adaita de Rabbi. It took 40 years, because Moshe said, Ata reisa ladas, right? When the Jewish people were at the end of 40 years in the desert, he says, now you've been seen to know. So he said, now I've been with you for 40 years, Moshe Rabbeinu. I didn't see anything yet. I didn't see all the miracles. But he says, it takes 40 years for you to basically process what has been taught to you. According to some opinions, it's when you turn 40, by the way. Which means you can actually get not only to the details of what the Rav is trying to sort of describe to you in some kind of an external way, but all of a sudden you found yourself back into what he was really saying, which is original, which is his mind. You become the Rav. Shayde Gilui or Zeh, through this revelation, Nimshach ba'olam sheyeh batul elokuz b'tachlis habitul. And if you're suddenly this conduit of the Rav, so you're like the Rebbe in the world. You're essentially a walking level of divinity which is beyond creation. That's called Dira B'tachtonim. That's called Bitul Metzias. V'kein tiyeh lanu. Okay, we'll hold here for today. It's not close nefesh in the sense that you leave your body, though. It's close nefesh in the sense that, like Rabbi Akiva, you stay alive and have close nefesh. If you leave